Welcome everyone. Very warm good morning to one and all. Welcome to another episode of CeRAI Conversations. Just to give you like a brief info about Center for Responsible AI, we are an interdisciplinary research center at Vadwani School of Data Science and AI at IIT Madras. So, under the leadership of Professor Balram and Ravindran, we are a research center that carries out some fundamental and applied research in responsible AI. Our technical research spanning across areas of from building and designing AI models and systems all the way up to making them fair, understandable, safe, and secure. We also carry out a lot of policy research on in AI governance, regulation, risk assessment frameworks, and so on. We have education outreach programs and training programs, events, and our research areas and all these activities that we are carrying out includes the areas applied domains like healthcare, education, law, and finance also now. We aspire ourselves to get established to enable and ensure responsible design, development, deployment of AI-based solutions in the real world for the real world in a safe and secure manner. Regarding CeRAI conversations, so what this brings to the people, right? So this is a recurring webinar series that is actually meant to build a lot of awareness about responsible AI, making people aware about the do's and don't do's with respect to AI. Uh, and we are expecting some, we plan to bring together researchers, industry thought leaders, and try to make this like a candid conversation going beyond just academic talks. So we also try to have like a focus theme each time. Today we have responsible AI and AI deployment as our theme, and this like kind of reflects our broader mission also, like bringing together like research, translating from research to real world practices, and we want to ensure that these conversations reach out to the public as well, going beyond just research community, right? So that's our agenda with this CRAI conversations. And with for today's format, we have a tech talk to begin with, and we have a fireside chat, which should be very interesting. And we also have like a few lightning talks from our CRI researchers, giving you like an in-depth view of the work that happens at the center. So without further ado, I'm very honored to welcome Dr. Kalika Bali to CRI Conversations. Dr. Kalika Bali is a senior principal researcher at Microsoft Research Labs India, where she has dedicated nearly 2 decades to enhancing human-computer interactions through language technologies. Her focus lies in creating inclusive tech for a diverse range of languages and communities, especially those that are underrepresented. Her recent work explores the intersection of multilingual and multicultural AI with a strong emphasis on safety, inclusion, and responsible innovation. As an advisor to the India AI mission, she has contributed to the AI governance initiatives in the Global South and is a co-author of India's first AI governance guidelines. She also currently serves in the scientific advisory board for Center for Responsible AI. So very happy to welcome you, Kalika ma'am. Welcome to CRI Conversations, and please go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you so much. I will first share my screen. Uh, just give me a second. Yes, here we go. I hope you can see this. Yeah. So thank you so much for having me over. And, I would like to frame like it. I'll talk for 10 minutes. I'd like to frame this mostly around, the kind of things we have to think about when we are doing real world deployments, whether they are pilots, whether they are actual product deployments or service deployments, where we have to take these principles of responsible AI and put them into practice. So, we have become really good at making statements about responsible AI, about safety, but then the part where the developers or the deployers have to take these statements and these principles and include them in the entire pipeline of a deployment are sketchy, to say the least. It's not very clear what they're supposed to do, how they're supposed to think about it. So I'm kind of laying the context for it and, not going very deep, but would love to have more conversation around it with actual specifics in this fireside chat. So when we talk about, responsible AI, actually, the real test begins after model evaluations. And I had created these slides yesterday, and today morning I saw a post from Arvind Narayanan and from Princeton, and he said, and it really resonates with me. He said that uh, models are not what people interact with on the whole, right? So actually saying that a model is really good or doing evaluation of the model is only the starting point. After that, you know, um, the people interact with the way the model is deployed in a solution or a service or a system. And we have to actually evaluate how safe and how responsible that entire system is for the population that it is catering for. So in that sense, responsible AI actually um, governs the entire socio-technical system. And I believe that, when we are talking about real world deployments, we are actually talking about a socio-technical system. So we have to worry about things like fairness. Are we being fair to everybody who is going to experience the system? Transparency. Do people know what is happening, at least at a level? I mean, it's not as if they have to go deep into how the entire solution was developed and how the model was built, but can a person challenge the outcome of that system, and who is accountable when things do not go the way they are expected to? And an example of this is that when we have a chatbot in any language, the model behind it might have scored really high on just the language capabilities, but if it fails to read a code mixed query, or does not give any, is not able to give a reason for its or a valid reason for its output, and offers no appeal to say that no, you're wrong, or clarifications, etc., then I believe that it's a failure, right? It's not um, as successful as the numbers might show on a sheer model evaluation. So my, over the years, the kind of thing that I have come towards is like, begin with the impact. What is the impact that you're trying to have, and not the capability alone of the model? I mean, do not start with how capable the model is, except in a very cursory manner. You really want to know what is it that you're trying to do. What is the impact that you're seeking through your deployment? The first question for me always remain that, should AI be even used here, and under what conditions, right? Because right now, of course, because this is the AI, upcycle, everybody wants to use AI everywhere. And sometimes you might have simpler and better solutions where AI is not at all necessary. You also have to define, what is the intended use case, what is out of scope, and what is a prohibited use. And this can vary so much from the domain and the solution that the specific solution that you're deploying. And if we look at various kind of domains, just having AI recommend something is a low stake thing. But if you are thinking of healthcare, you need a lot more, insights into where and how the system can harm, or even, give inappropriate, you know, um, output, because that there we have like very high stakes. People's lives and their well-being is seriously affected if the system or the solution does not do what it intends to do. And I would take it a little further and say that you have to name what are the harms that you expect, and what are how it could be harmful to a certain population, and what are the alternatives to that, right? I would say that like a responsible AI thinking about a solution that's going to be deployed in field has to have this, and it raise the burden of evidence with consequence. You have to provide evidence that it's working well here and it is not working well here, and what is the consequence of it working well, the positive impact, and also the negative harm that might be there in that case. Now, because I work mainly on Global South as a region for AI, I believe that just absence is a bias, right? If you have languages that are missing, you have, you're not looking at intersectional performances, you're not using, locally authored tasks or native speaker judgments, and you're not asking who gets the benefit and who carries the risk, then that is a bias. That is unfair, right? And I just put this as a the numbers on the thing are not real numbers, but average accuracies. The point I'm trying to make is that average accuracies, when we evaluate these systems, are very misleading, because on an average, a system may have a very high performance, but when you start breaking it down into certain parameters, then you discover that actually for a very large segment of the intended customers or the intended users, it fails. It completely fails, right? So you have to go beyond average accuracies and average evaluations to really dig deep and see where it is working and where it is not working. Otherwise, you will not be able to, deploy it in a very fruitful and scalable manner. The other thing also that I would like to emphasize is that all these things are really related: reliability, safety, privacy, security. These are all words that are bandied around, but they're all kind of related to make the system successful or the solution successful. You have to test in real conditions, right? And you have to have somebody who has an oversight on the system, kind of things, right? So in practice, if you see like a health assistant, who's using AI empowered solution, can retrieve curated guidance, they can flag uncertainties, they can escalate risky solutions to an actual clinician, and put the corrections as part of an evaluation loop to make that solution more useful. And there are a lot of examples of how and where these pipelines break when we are not thinking along the entire pipeline. Sorry. So the one other thing that I feel very strongly about is that design has to be participatory. The era of technologists sitting in their ivory towers and just designing solution based on their own limited understanding of how a particular community or user group behaves is gone. You have to get them to participate, to shape the problem, to understand the requirements, to evaluate the product, and maybe even release and maintain a particular solution. And you have to think about all these different things as accessibility, affordability, language, literacy, what kind of devices are they using, what are the connectivity realities on the ground as an RAI requirement, and give very audience-specific transparencies. Engineers need to know what is going wrong. Operators need to know how to give feedback to improve, and if they're stuck in an error, how to go around it. And so do the users. Like if they are harmed or they have received inappropriate output, what to do about it. And these explanations at the end have to enable, verification, correction, and make the solution more in tune with the particular user group that they are catering to. We tend to, as technologists, tend to think of accountability after the launch, right? We are all stuck in this high-paced environment where we're very eager to just build things and push them out, and we'll worry about RAI, later. We will worry about, harms later. And then, you hear a lot of very senior technologists say, but the things that you're talking about are, they may happen, may not happen. And I do not think that is a very useful way of thinking about it. You have to kind of, have a very closed assurance loop and think of accountability throughout that loop, before and after the launch, right? And before the launch, the kind of things that I'm talking about, that like you're evaluating before deployment, and you figure out that it's not working really well for these two things, but it's working really amazingly well for the other 10 things. You have to pull back and think of what your solution for that is. Do you want to then deploy saying that this is not for those two things, but for the other 10 things? Do you want to, then monitor and see how you can make it work? Or do you want to like stop the deployment and work on those two things to a certain level? So all that has to be thought about. Well, who is accountable? Who is going to solve this if things go wrong? And this has to be done before and not after the launch. Of course, you have to monitor and intervene, after the launch to see how this goes. So the other thing I would like to, this is like my last slide, emphasizes that principles have to go towards engineering requirements. We are great at putting out principles, and developers get very frustrated with these principles. Like, okay, you've told me no harm, but what do I do with that no harm? What are the conditions under which it will be harmful? What are the conditions that I have to take care of in the code, in the space of application development, etc., right? And like I said, global averages are meaningless. You have to have contextual participatory evidence, and one-time review is meaningless again. Like you did some review or some evaluation at the beginning and said this model is great and it's going to work great, and then you forget about any other evaluations because you have that number to flash to your VCs or your bosses, etc., and you're fine with it. You have to kind of do it in an iterative manner. You have to do it continuously, and you have to be ready to redress and adapt your systems to make your solutions truly accountable. And my call to action is that we really need to have shared local language evaluations, incident learning systems, and community participation. Those three remain my top thing. And of course, deployment assurance capacity, because this, sometimes that capacity only does not exist in the developing, context, in the developers space. So I'll stop here, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kalika ma'am. So now we actually move on to a fireside chat, after which we'll have maybe a few minutes for the Q&A as well. Just want to, so the fireside chat is on the theme turning responsible AI innovation into impact. And we have Professor Ravindran, head of Wadhwani School of Data Science and AI and the Center for Responsible AI, joining Dr. Kalika Bali. Just want to briefly introduce Professor Ravindran. Professor Ravindran heads the data Department of Data Science and AI at IIT Madras. He's also the founding head of Wadhwani School of Data Science and AI at IIT Madras and the Center for Responsible AI. He has more than 3 decades of experience working in reinforcement learning, and his research interests span responsible AI and deep reinforcement learning. Professor Ravi is an elected fellow of AAAI, Indian National Academy of Engineering, and is an ACM distinguished member. He's also the chair of the committee that drafted the India AI governance guidelines to provide
Along
a
with
framework
Kalika.
for the development and deployment of safe and trustworthy AI systems. He was also a member of RBI's free AI framework, which provided the guidelines for safe, ethical AI adoption in the financial sector. Recently, he has also been serving as the member of the UN International Independent Scientific Panel on AI. So, welcome, Professor Ravindran. Uh, Over to you both. Yeah.
Thank you, Gokul, and thank you, Kalika, for a great talk, setting the context for today. And I just wanted to know, just tell a lighter thing. Usually, when people look at that big intro of mine, they just start off by saying, "Oh, Professor Ravi, there's no intro, so let's skip on." Not everybody has the patience of Gokul to read through that. So thanks for
Right.
reading through it, Gokul. Anyway, so I wanted to take up a few things. In fact, the theme of the discussions I wanted to have, right, is around actually the first question that we have from Dr. Ashish Katyal here. It's just serendipitous, right? We didn't plan it or anything. So the idea is, I was having this conversation about, this started with the notion of informed consent, right? And it goes way beyond that, right? But so, what is your thought on, before model building itself, right? Instead of saying that responsible AI starts after model building, I'm saying responsible AI starts before model building.
Yeah.
When you're trying to do the whole, data gathering for the model and so on and so forth, what do people even understand, right? I mean, how do you design informed consent? We can write a law somewhere saying that, yeah, you
Yeah.
cannot gather data without informed consent. How do
Yeah.
you even verify the consent is informed? And
Yeah. I think it is that's a very tricky thing. It's also depends on who you're taking informed consent from, right? If you're gathering data for, say, some of our languages where people are not really that aware of, how data is used, what they are giving up, what kind of data they're providing, it becomes really tricky. So some of the things that we've done in, the past, when we've been gathering data, is to have, the legal folks will come up with this really complicated document that none of us, like, we are supposed to agree to a lot of things when we are using. Nobody reads it. You just scroll down and say yes, and then end of the thing, right? Because it's like such a complicated thing. So what we have done in the past, and continue to do, when we are gathering data from, communities where there would be less understanding of, why they're giving data, is to have not only in local language, because that's just one barrier, but also, explaining in very simple terms what the data would be used for, right? So that they understand. But even that is not enough, honestly, because people still must misunderstand because they do not understand the complexity. You cannot really explain, the whole entire training process to somebody who does not even know how technology is built, right? And I have a very good example of that. We were collecting data for, I think, Marathi voice data at one point. And, we thought we'd done a really good job, explained, had it in local language, explained to them by giving analogous examples. A lot of people in that community used Google Voice. Right. So we said, how Google Voice works, you use it, and, that's what we're going to use. And then we did this debriefing session with the data workers and discovered that what they thought was that their voice would be the Google Voice for Marathi. So there is like so much misunderstanding, and we talk about transparency. It is difficult, but it is so important to make people understand, at some basic level. And people keep telling me, oh, I'm again using a car analogy, that when to drive a car, you don't need to know how the engine is built, right? But you still have to have some understanding that if your engine is not good, your car is going to get stalled, right? Or so that's
Yeah.
a very difficult kind of a tricky thing. But I believe we can do better than we have been doing all the way till now.
Yeah, and in some sense, I feel that we are falling farther behind every day because when yesterday I was at an event, right, where somebody asked this question, hey, in this age where a lot of people are starting to use AI, how do I get credit for my work in my workplace? Okay, I mean,
Yeah,
that's a question somebody asked.
yeah.
And the expert who was on the panel said, oh, just don't use AI. That is the only way you can ensure you get credit for it. What?
Yeah,
What is,
yeah.
I,
There has to be
I,
a better way.
no, I had to work very hard to keep quiet on the panel, but I didn't want
Yeah.
to call out the person.
I
So
was in an
we,
event yesterday, and I was talking to some, prominent companies,
Mhm.
people, and they said, one of them said, but oh, so this is all RAI, but we have to really think about how we make money, right? We have to really be worried about our bottom line.
Bottom line, yeah,
Yeah.
sure. We have to worry about the bottom line. But I'm just talking about, I mean, that is the intent from the company side. I'm just saying that people are getting exposed to so much of these, bad advice in some sense, in terms of how to use AI, when to use AI. In fact, somebody was saying, oh, the best way to control the AI properly is to treat the AI like a human being. Again, from
Okay.
yesterday's event.
Yeah.
So, so
Sure. Or
when we
maybe
have these
several
kinds of
human
explanations,
beings.
yeah, sure, yeah, yeah. Anyway, so that is always a challenge, right? But I want to go back. Let's move down the phases of deployment, right?
Yeah.
So the second thing I wanted to ask about, well, so the first thing we have now concluded is we really don't have a good way to get the informed consent, because I'm not sure how you will explain it to people. What does it mean? Uh, yeah,
Yeah.
I know it's a
I
missing
agree with that.
battle.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what is the solution? I mean, is there a solution for it? I mean, do we actually say that you cannot? I mean, you have to narrowly scope down how you are going to use the data so that it is explainable to the person who is from whom you are taking the data, and
At
then
least
gather
at
the data.
some
You can't take
level.
a carte blanche for that. I mean, is that the way to do it?
I think no, I think like, at some level you can explain. Um, you know, maybe Google Voice wasn't such a good
Mhm.
analogous
Because
example.
the downstream users are too many. Right?
Yeah. But at some level, I guess you can explain that, your data is going to be used for this.
Yeah,
Um,
cough into the microphone. I'll use it only to figure out a model for TB.
yeah, something of that sort, right? Um, and
But
your
then
the
the
thing
auditing becomes a
the
challenge.
thing with informed consent is that in our country, people will give consent. People are generally quite okay about giving consent.
Yeah.
Um, eh, and that can have a negative impact. But usually, if you like tell them that this is what we are going to use for, I have never in my life had this episode where someone says, no, 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 I'm not going to give you my data, right?
Yeah. So I actually heard a funny story from somebody who was working on the field. People were happily giving them data when they didn't ask for consent. But as soon as they gave them a form and said you have to sign on this form, people stopped giving them data
Yeah,
because signing on a form
yeah.
sounded like entering into a legal agreement. So people did not want to do that. So that's it.
Yeah.
it
And also, like, we can have different ways. Instead of like getting them to sign on forms, we could have voice consent, right? Like, have them say that, yes, record them saying, yes,
yep.
I
And
agree.
that's
I
what we are.
understand this. And yeah, so
Yeah,
that
that's
that's
what we are
a,
trying to do now in one of our studies. Yeah. We're
yeah,
trying to get voice content. And
yeah,
getting the voice content approved from the ethics board was actually challenging.
yeah, yeah. I think the ethics boards also need to like kind of move with the times a little bit, a little bit. Yeah.
Sure. Great. So I want to go to the next thing, right? So I completely agree with you. In fact, CeRAI's philosophy, the founding philosophy is that we have to evaluate the system as a whole,
Yeah.
right? There is nothing
Yeah.
like model evaluation because you can never guarantee that the model is 100% right.
Yeah.
But having said that, there are some basic capabilities of the models
Yeah.
that we would
Yeah.
like to evaluate. Can
Yeah.
you tell us a little bit about what are the model evaluation challenges that are peculiar to operating in the global south?
Yeah. So I think model evaluation challenges, first and foremost is that we do not have like test data, the evaluation metrics, the benchmarks, the frameworks, which are relevant for the global south, right? Those are not there. A lot of the context is missing from these models. You have done studies, you have published papers around that, specifically, I remember the caste thing, right? And also the languages are missing, right? We are all really focusing, even in the global south, we are only focusing. I really like this. Somebody said this and it stuck with me, that there's a global north in the global south, right? So we are still catering to the global north of the global south, right? And going down the pipeline, data becomes such a huge problem for evaluation.
The global north of the global south qualify as Middle Earth?
Could be, right? I mean, I am really, if you look at global South, Korea, Japan, and all are part of the global South. They're clearly global North, right? Not global South at all in that sense. So data is a problem. Getting people who understand the context in which you're going to be evaluating is such a huge problem. And I know that CeRAI has done a lot of work around this. And, we've been talking, Microsoft Research and CeRAI researchers have been talking about this issue of who decides how the evaluation should be done, right? You can't have someone sitting in US or UK or Europe designing the evaluation for something that's going to be deployed in the global south, right? It has to be someone who kind of understands the context. The third thing is that I really dislike the translation thing, but that is the only starting point in the absence of data. But then that has to be truly verified, right? Translation is always lossy. It's always lossy. So when you're just taking like some English benchmarks or evaluation frameworks and just translating them into a language for which you do not have the data or the people to work on, make this available, it always is a problem. You discover it very soon. I think safety is not translatable.
I mean, there are a lot of cultural contexts that get lost, and I mean, yep. So we have had some hilarious mistranslations. Some that we have come across.
I have a pet peeve about this whole thing. People complain so much about how it's so resource intensive. There's so much money and effort has to be spent. We don't think that data centers are resource intensive. We don't think that entire training processes are resource intensive and require a lot of investment. So why here are we always cribbing about resources? If we care about this, working for a global population, then we should be ready to put in some effort.
But because we don't have this capital to invest in the global south.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it boils down to that, right? How much are you willing to throw?
Exactly.
So, I mean, so we spoke quite a bit about the lack of data, lack of benchmarks, and so on and so forth. But you also said metrics have to be different for the global south. I mean, I have my thoughts on it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. Right? So, why do you think metrics, and what kind of metrics are we talking about here?
So when we are talking about metrics, a certain kind of cultural metrics, socio-cultural norms have to be localized, right? The most obvious example, and since we mentioned this earlier, is race is actually irrelevant for us in India, right? If we are talking about racial metrics and racial, understanding of a model, it doesn't matter, but caste matters so much, right? And we don't have that. Maybe regional kind of diversity matters so much more in a country like India and most of the global south, I would say, than it does in US. In US, yes, there is a difference between East Coast, West Coast, North and South, but it isn't that diverse regionally, right?
We are being recorded, otherwise I will say something here.
We are being recorded. So those kind of things we have to take into account, and we have to really push for them to be applicable, um, a person in an Indian thing, like taking a health decision, a woman, even for maternal health, has to take into account what her mother-in-law thinks and what her family thinks and what her mother is telling her, etc., much more than, say they would in the global north. So those kind of metrics have to be kind of attuned to the local
Yeah, so
situation.
in one of the studies that we did, we actually had to introduce metrics about the geographic diversity of the recommendations that were being made,
Yeah, of
right?
course.
And then we basically figured out that all recommendations were to universities in the global north.
Yeah.
And even when the person said, "I want to study in my home country," it still asked them to go to the US.
Yeah, so there you go. Maybe it can also provide the ticket and the admissions.
Yeah, sure. Okay, yeah, I know I'm jumping from topic to topic,
That's
just giving a
fine.
sampler
Yeah,
of the to the audience. So basically,
yeah, yeah.
we have discussed many of these things. We can keep discussing this till comes to home. But so the next thing I wanted to talk about, right? So we talked about the model building. Then we have to talk about the accessibility of the deployment. So, right?
Yeah.
And I strongly believe that models that are really frontier, cutting edge, are going to be much harder to deploy broadly
Yeah.
within a country like India or broadly in the global south, where you're going to have a large population starting to access it, a huge demand for uptime for these models, and so on and so forth. And so, what is your take on it, and what do you think should be an alternative way to approach this? Is this
Yeah,
going to be a challenge?
I think it is a challenge for a variety of reasons, right? Like once you're taking these huge, even the open weight models, you're taking these huge models, you still have to adapt them, right? Like they're never going to be as good for our languages as they are for, global north, just because of the way they're trained in the data, etc. They're optimized for a certain, population in a certain context. And I do think like, small language models can be really powerful in the global south because it allows us to kind of cater to very diverse contexts and situations. So I do believe in that. Sovereign models are a very good way forward. Um, we have to see how in real practice where they're deployed and how people are like trying to build on top of the sovereign models that are increasingly available, because they do have that balance different for local and this thing. I also think that, adapting small language models or smaller language models with highly curated, high quality, smaller data, and creating some sort of a synthetic data pipeline in the absence of enough data to train a large model, they're starting to give very good results. So that I think is a way to explore, and there we can actually control for a lot of local context that we've talked about and responsible AI,
Yeah, that
issues.
like so I'm genuinely curious about this. Right? So,
Mm.
what is the operating cost? Even if let's say I'm going to build like a 108 billion parameter model. So, and I want to now start catering to 1.5 billion citizens in India. So I'm wanting to run government services on which is going to be the back end. There'll be a significant, load that's going to come on these on a daily basis. And what I mean, how much would the government have to underwrite for us to build something
At scale,
based on these
at
things at
that,
scale? At that scale.
like have an equivalent of like an
I
Anthropic
don't
or
know.
an OpenAI model for
I'm
India.
talking about 108 billion, right? I mean, that's not
108,
Anthropic about.
yeah, but even there, I think it is like far more than we have been investing right now.
Yeah, I know, I know.
Um,
Let's even go back to 30 billion.
yeah.
It's like Sarvam's,
So
like,
I think it is in, upwards, at least in tens of billions of dollars, if not hundreds, which for a country like India is quite a lot of money to invest. So I really think that there should be some sort of investment in the research ecosystem with the institutes that are working on this to kind of work on ways in which we can we don't have to follow the same methodology, same way in which, say, an OpenAI trains a model. We have to, DeepSeek was able to do it, they say.
Yeah, training is one thing, correct? I mean, training
Just
is fine. You
like
do this
you're
once.
talking about,
I'm not talking about deploy everyday running of these models. Right? Even then, if these
it's a
models
lot.
are this size, I'm going to have to put them on a GPU. It's not
Yeah.
like you're going to vanish.
Yeah.
Everybody keeps saying, "Oh, inference cost is minimal compared to training
No,
costs," right? But
yeah,
inference costs at this scale,
it is a lot. It is
it's
a
going to be
lot.
a lot, right?
It is going to be a lot. And again, there we have to kind of probably, do a lot more research and a lot more deep thinking on how we can, maybe you have some kind of a distributed system, infra, right?
Yeah.
And that has its own issues, I understand. But like if you have a you hear all these stories, and globally you've seen all these incidents that happen when all employees in the company are given access to a model. They're not training models, they're just using it. And within a day, they bust some budget.
Yeah, budget,
And
yeah,
then you
yeah,
have to kind of pull back, right? So this is an unsolved problem. And I mean, there's so much work to be done in this area of infra optimization. Somebody gave me a very interesting solution about like this distributed thing, which I thought was interesting. It has to be seen how good um, mm, it is. Like instead of having, really big GPUs, etc., have the smaller ones kind of built together. It's an evolving field. It's
Sure.
not like
Yeah,
done
yeah,
and dusted yet.
yeah. I agree. I agree.
Yeah.
That's fine. Okay, so let's move to the next stage in the deployment thing, right? So human oversight. How feasible is human oversight?
I think it is absolutely necessary in high
I know
stake,
I didn't
high,
ask you about the necessity part of
no,
it. I asked about the feasibility.
high stake environment. So yeah, if you're building a travel app, you don't have a human oversight, that's fine. If you're building a healthcare app and you do not have human oversight, it's really a problem. Now, the thing is, we think of human oversight only when incidents occur. So a feasible way is to design the loop in such a way, design the solution in such a way that there is a human who has, an expert, whatever you may call it, right? The right person to verify. And, there are ways in which people have been like doing this expert in the loop kind of systems, which are kind of working. We have a lot more to do on the design of thing. I think it is feasible right now, especially in a country like India. We have no dearth of experts, and just how we design for them as well, right? Like, what is the incentive for them to be the human in the loop as well?
So I have two pushbacks on that. Right? So the first one is something that some folks from a bank were telling me that they had implemented this kind of an expert on the loop, but then there is this unconscious automation bias that creeps in because these
Yeah,
models are so good
absolutely.
that they make errors only once every so
Yeah,
often. So people just tend to blindly just pass it because that's easy on there. Right?
yeah, yeah.
So that is one question. The second one I'm really concerned about is there are so many applications where the human time scales and the decision time scales of
Are different.
matching.
Yeah.
So you can have human in the loop. But what about say some industry automation stuff where things are moving much faster than so putting a human in the loop literally takes away the advantage of having the AI automation in there, right? So
So
um,
I do think it has to be designed properly, right? Like not every
no, they
decision
could
doesn't
not
have
design.
to, no, every decision does not have to go to a human. Whoever's using the thing can flag certain things. The other thing is that what we do not have are these standards for deployment like we would have in other automation scenarios, like in manufacturing industry, nobody uses a device or a machine or any process without it meeting a certain criteria which is set by an industrial body, right? We don't have that for AI. I don't know if that is possible, like across the board. It has to be very domain specific. But if we
Very much.
have these standards, right, then we only flag things where it doesn't meet that criteria. So there, I think the industrial bodies in various domains have to be involved. Like, for example, for the financial thing, when you have to have the banks, RBI, other financial corporations part of it, right? Similarly, for manufacturing, we won't use a machine. We won't use a medical device without it meeting the criteria set by ICMR, et cetera, right? So how can we just put out AI solutions without having any of those criteria even set for these solutions, right? Right now, it's like a wild west of AI. It's that phase we are going through where like you just put out everything, see how it works, what it does. But I think for high stakes, it's like impossible to overlook this.
Yeah, I'm not even going to bring up military applications of AI
That,
here.
yeah,
No, I'm not. I said let's not go there. But I know when you talk about high stakes and I talk about small time scales, and there we are. Like literally
yeah,
every decision has to be done at an accelerated time scale, and
yeah.
almost every decision is high stakes.
Yeah, I think what we also need, Ravi, are we have to kind of skill our people better to make judgments,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Because we have like been so stuck in like knowledge focus, right? Like let's teach our kids how to acquire knowledge. I strongly feel that we have to go from knowledge to, um, how do you make the right kind of judgment in an ambiguous or a tricky situation? And that is a skill that needs to be developed in
No,
humans.
I agree, and so you know that ITM has been involved in building this critical thinking curriculum
Yes,
also for schools
absolutely.
now.
Yeah.
So I think that is the direction we want to push. But then let's think about people who have been trying to make decisions post coming out of schools, right? I mean, we're talking about the general public. Let's take somebody like a loan manager or things like that. Even there, they are not quite sensitized to how AI arrives at decisions and what are the things that they should watch out for when they are
Yeah,
actually verifying this AI.
absolutely.
So a lot of education needs to be done. In fact, a lot of research needs to be done to find this out before we start doing the
Yeah,
education. I
yeah,
think we are missing that
yeah.
big time.
I
I
so agree with you.
just want to do a quick time check with Gokul. Well,
Yeah,
Kalika and I can talk for like a few more hours. Yeah,
Yeah.
we can talk for like 5 more minutes.
Okay.
That's fine. Then we will
5
take a few
more
questions
minutes.
from the
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
yeah.
So
Okay.
I would also to the point that we were discussing about like, um, so India is a very tech positive country, you know. Lay people who know nothing about technology believe on the whole that technology is going to solve all the problems. And I actually fear that this over dependence thing that we touched on very briefly is actually one of the most harmful. I mean, I see it all around me. Now AI can do it, and do it so well. So I will not even check. Um, you see
Yeah,
it in research papers that people put out, right? Postdoc
don't
level,
get me
young
started.
research level people who should know better, right? Put in submissions without checking whether the references are hallucinated, and this is a problem. Even then you do not check, then that says something. Just believing because like an app told you so is a thing that I think we have to also, as AI technologists, take a responsibility for that, because we really hyped things a lot, right?
Don't. Well, maybe your bosses do, Kanika, but even I don't.
No, I mean, I'm talking as a community, right? Like
No,
because
I'm talking more of the industry pace of it. I don't think the academia hypes it to the extent that the industry does, and it's a little scary to me. But
Yeah.
so I just wanted to finish the thread. I have one last question in the
Sure.
tail end of the pipeline to
Sure.
ask you.
Sure.
So model monitoring, right? So I mean, you mentioned this during your presentation that testing one time is not enough, and that they have to keep coming back. But how do you instrument it, right? So that is not clear to me. I mean, of course, in very controlled deployments, we can do that. But if you're going to put out AI at large and have this productionized and have like, a few million, 100 million people use the AI model and so on and so forth, how would you even operationalize model monitoring?
So I think like, kind of having certain interactions kept aside for testing, and having like a, real, because, we kind of deprioritize this monitoring thing, right? So that's why everybody thinks it's like really, how are we going to do it? But to have, when we put something on flight, right, before production, we have that mechanism where we're taking the inputs and putting a certain percentage of those interactions to keep evaluating how the model is doing. And I think something of that sort can easily be done. It requires resources, it requires you to do it. Like, say, even if it's 1% across various deployments to be collected and to be done, it takes a will, really. Like, it's like if you want to do it. I don't think it's not feasible. I think there is like, oh, this is not important, so why do we want to waste that time and energy and resources into this?
Yeah. So this goes back to something that I always, one of the, again, founding principles of what CeRAI was about. The fact that a lot of the issues that we don't know how to answer technically now will have to be answered through policy,
I
regulations. So that is why CeRAI does as much policy work as we do technical work as well. And
Yeah, so
again,
absolutely, Ravi. I always tell everybody this very openly, that no commercial entity is accountable to a citizen, right?
no,
They are only accountable to the shareholders. A commercial entity, by definition, their absolute reason for existence is to make money, for their shareholders, right? The only entity that is actually accountable and obligated to work for the citizens of a country is the government. So, it is upon the policy makers to come up with the policies, the right kind of policies. But the thing that I worry a lot about is that, do we have right now the regulatory capacity to do all the things that need to be done? And the question that I always grapple with is that, in the absence of this capacity, or this capacity being only in just very little pockets everywhere, how do we, do a, more like a tech-based policy intervention? So that requires a lot of capacity building also at the policymakers levels, right? And CeRAI is leading that, but we need at least 100 more CeRAIs in the country.
Kalika, there is so much significant pushback. We are getting frustrated. The significant pushback from government saying, "Oh yeah, we know all of these things. We don't have to tell us."
At some point, they'll realize that they don't, they have to come to
Anyway,
experts.
so thank you. And so, any concluding thoughts that you want to say, or
No,
should we
I
just
think,
jump into questions?
yeah, I really feel that, it is important. Responsible development and deployment is important everywhere, but it is so much more important in our country. And if we don't jump into this and start taking it absolutely seriously, I'm preaching to the choir here, talking to you, right? Like, you all know this much, much better than anybody here. But if we don't take this seriously, what we are going to end up doing is, a technology that can actually has this huge potential, once in a lifetime, or once in an epoch, potential to bridge gaps. And I hate that phrase, but everyone understands it, is actually going to widen the gap. So technology will only work for the haves. AI will only cater to the haves, and the have-nots will only be left with the AI slop. if at all. So we really have to take this seriously. Everyone who's developing and deploying has to take this seriously.
No, I completely agree with you on it. And let's try to do something together. But do we want to take
Yes.
some questions now?
Yes, absolutely. Happy to.
Okay, Gokul, are you going to curate and ask us some, or we should bring
Uh,
it off the Q&A panel?
no, I think I'll like take it up one at a time, but we also have like marked a few and rephrased a few. So, first question, yeah, we have a question from Dr. Ashish Katyal. So, it's about how can we operationalize and measure inclusiveness, transparency in AI systems, particularly when affected users have low digital literacy, limited connectivity, or cannot independently verify the AI's explanations. Right?
I mean, I think he spoke mostly about that, right? I mean, I
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
mentioned his question before we started our chat, saying
Yeah.
that it's kind of serendipitous that this was the first question because that is what how we were planning to talk. I think
All right. So we can maybe jump
it's
to the
very relevant, yeah,
second
very
one
very
as well.
relevant
Yeah.
Yeah.
question,
Yeah.
Dr. Katyal.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
he has one more question as well, which we can that is actually referring to the agricultural voice AI example. If the system gives incorrect advice in local language, who is responsible for enabling the farmer to detect challenge and correct that decision? Should transparency be designed differently for engineer, operator, and the affected user?
Yeah.
Yes.
The answer to the last part of the question is yes, transparency has to be designed differently for engineer, operator, and user. Um, but who is responsible? In my view, I would say the solution provider or the person who's deploying the application is responsible because they did not do their work before deployment, right? They did not check the context in which it can give inaccurate answers because they have a choice of the models as well, so they should have.
How much don't you think there is no responsibility on the model developers for full disclosure of the capabilities of
They
the
have
model?
to.
Isn't there a litigation waiting to happen there?
There
I
is
don't
a
know. I'm
litigation
serious about it.
waiting to happen for a
Yeah, yeah.
very different reason, right? Like,
Mhm.
but the thing also is that if I am taking a solution out to the farmers,
Mhm.
I have to understand what the model is capable of and not capable of. I don't blindly pick up a model. But of course, like if I feel that that
Mhm.
model was the builder has not given me the right information, then that's a different thing. But from a
Exactly.
user's perspective, the first stop is the person selling it, right? When a car fails, a user will go to the car manufacturer and sue them, and then it's up to the car manufacturer to sue the engine provider.
Yeah, but they're not showing the car dealer. Okay.
Not the car dealer, but car dealer is not the same as the person who's manufacturing the car.
Hmm.
That's what I feel.
I agree with. I mean, this is what we put in the free AI report also. So it's there we said the deployer is the one who takes the final thing. But the argument there was slightly different. We said that's the only entity that RBI can regulate.
That's also the only entity that user has access to. How will a user,
That is true.
you know?
Now, the user, I mean, the user has to go to the deployer, but the question is where does the buck stop? And I'm just saying the buck need not stop with
Yeah,
the
it
service
need not
provider. It can potentially the service
go.
provider can
Yeah, yeah,
potentially
yeah,
push it
yeah,
upstream as well.
yeah.
Okay.
But maybe it's like it stops at I mean, if the application developers and the solution providers or the service providers know that they can be sued, they would also do their homework
Due
better.
diligence, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And it might go back to the data provider saying that, hey, you said you covered all these kind of accents, and apparently your data doesn't cover all accents in southern India. Therefore, I'm suing you.
Yeah, but
So
they
I
have
it's just
they have very
yeah,
strict service agreements, the data providers.
I know, but sure. But
Yeah.
I'm just saying that the
Yeah,
whole
yeah.
liability question is a lot more nuanced and diffused than
Absolutely.
people
I mean,
usually
all of this,
understand.
I'm
Yeah.
talking in very gross generalizations. So let me put that caveat because everything that we've touched upon has very deep and very nuanced, arguments for and against.
Go on. Go for the next question, please.
Yeah. So there is a question by Avinash Sharma. Does responsible AI get harder or easier as models get more capable? On one hand, more capability should mean fewer failures, better handling of code mixed and culturally specific queries. On the other, capable models are harder to deploy at the last mile, harder to inspect, and easier to overtrust. Which direction do you think it actually cuts?
Ravi, you want to say something? Because I have a very, simplistic view on this. Some
Go
things
ahead,
get
go ahead.
harder,
Yeah.
some things get easier. So it isn't like as models get more capable, everything becomes easier. Because until and unless we solve this deployment infra, context, those problems remain. So some things get harder, some things get easier. There isn't. I'm sorry. This sounds like a wishy-washy answer, but that's what I
But
truly believe.
that's the truth, right? So in fact, for example, it might the model itself might be capable of checking its outputs and controlling itself. We can have the model do a reiteration on the output before it gives a thing. But then it also becomes much more subtle at doing deceptions, and so it becomes harder. So I think capability cuts both ways.
Yeah, and you've seen what's happening, right? You've heard all the recent reports of agents doing social engineering, the UKAC report on how, agents got people to give their passwords, etc., because they're so capable. They're so capable. But
Oh,
then,
and that endorsement thing was like crazy.
uh,
Right? Yeah. That
yeah,
required really deep planning,
yep,
which I have been maintaining AI is not capable of. So the current
yeah.
generation.
Yeah.
Sorry.
We have a question by Twisha Sriyan. Dear professors, you highlighted that translating Western safety benchmarks is inherently lossy and relying on automated LLM as judge models risks enforcing Western demographic biases over local realities like caste and regional diversity. However, building ground up participatory and local valuation frameworks requires massive capital, which is often lacking in global south. From both engineering and policy perspective, how do we bridge this resource gap to scale up responsible AI evaluation?
Okay, so I just don't buy this. We don't have the money. Thing to do these things anymore. We have loads of money. Just look around you, how many things are being invested in and how much money is floating. It's just like, having the, somebody having the foresight and the will and the authority to put it in the right place. But having said that, of course, there's a difference, between the, Western concepts and things. The simple answer you have to answer is like, do you want this to work for your population or you do not want it to work for your population? If you want it to work, then you better put the resources. Translation is absolutely useless except as a starting point. And all of us have like umpteen examples of this. I can like write a book of examples on translation failures for, doing especially responsible AI kind of things, right? So
Yeah.
I
And
don't buy.
we can contribute chapters to the book.
Yes, exactly. We can take out a series of volumes. So, so you know that, right? So if you really are serious about, catering to this population, then you just have to put in the resources. I have never bought that. Even earlier, when people used to say, oh, getting data for Indian languages is very hard and we don't have the resources. Look now, right? Look at what AI for Bharat has done, right? Look at how much we have been able to achieve in 5 years, right? It required the investment at the right place and it required the investment by the right people, right? And a will, not only political will, but will along the pipeline to take this seriously. And that's all that is required right now. We have the resources and we work for very little. So we have the resources, we don't need thousands or thousands of dollars to do one small thing. Sorry, Ravi, I feel very angry, not angry, like I have a very strong reaction when people say there's no money.
Well, being academia can say.
I think that academia at this point in the history of India,
Okay, sure.
yeah,
History of India, we're always better.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
We're in the
Yeah,
positive trajectory. Yeah.
we have one
No,
question from we are just taking two more questions.
okay.
So we have one question from Professor Anandita Sahu. So what aspects of human language are difficult to capture in AI deployment in various sectors, especially in the context of endangered and low resource languages?
That's up your alley. You answer. I'm not going to do
Okay.
anything.
So in case of endangered and very low resource languages, everything, because we just do not have the data at all. So it's not an aspect. It's just like the language itself, requires a lot of support and data creation and curation, and to do it in a slightly more smart way than the regular. Let's just collect all the data that we can gather type of a thing. In other things, code switching is one very obvious one because it's like such an integral part of our culture, linguistic culture, and it's not just English and an Indian language. We code switch a lot between Indian languages as well, right? If you look at this border area, there is a lot of code switching between Oriya and Telugu, for example, right? So those kind of things are extremely important. The other thing is that there's specific linguistic phenomenon across our languages that are not present in, say, English, and we have to really think about capturing data relevant to that. So I'm not saying that you have to come and sit up and make rules for it like we used to in the 20 years ago, but you have to have data, enough data to represent those phenomena. Um, Tokenization is a huge problem for Indian languages because we tend to kind of create words by putting things together. Telugu, for example, one single sentence can be um, several words actually, right? Like one, literally one word in the script, but it's actually composed of several words all put in together. So there are many such phenomenon. The thing is that how we, a lot of languages are pro-drop, right? The worrying thing about pronouns, for example, like what gender, how gender is exhibited in the language is so different. Most Indian languages, there are exceptions, but most Indian languages do not have gendered pronouns. So we are not worried about he, she, him, right? It's all it for us. It's gender neutral, but we have gender in other places. So those kind of things, it's not as if you have to work through those linguistic problems anymore, thankfully, because you have no idea how much of my early career I spent in just creating these rules and, for a pause tagger to have a pause tagger, part of speech tagger, we spent a year creating one, right? So luckily we don't have to do all those things because the models are trained differently, they work differently, and they're quite capable of doing a lot of things that do not require this kind of input. But we have to ensure that somewhere in the pipeline there is representation of these phenomena, right? Otherwise, um, we won't be able to cater to the languages.
Thank you. We have one. I'll take one last question. So we have from Mr. Suhail Bidani. So can we come up with a set of principles and guidelines that will be enforced by AI Safety Institute, AI COEs, etc., and some that should be voluntarily followed by the ecosystems like funders, developers, etc.? If yes, who will or should develop these?
I'm going to let Ravi answer this.
Thank you, Suhail, for putting us on the spot. Um, yes, I mean, the answer is obviously yes, right? So I think we have to come up with these guidelines, and we can come up with guidelines. And as we have, suggested in the AI governance guidelines, there can be some part of it which is more universal, but a large fraction of this has to come from sectoral regulators. So I do believe that that exercise is beginning to some extent. At least the sectoral regulators have been asked to look at some aspects of these and then come up with their frameworks and things like that. There's also an effort now to look at regulatory gaps that exist in various sectors and so on and so forth. So all of these are uh, in my opinion, happening a little in a desultory fashion, right? I mean, doesn't seem to be a coordinated effort. That's probably because we still don't have the AI Safety Institute properly in place. But at least the way it's conceptualized, the Safety Institute is not the place to make the regulations or enforce the regulations. I don't think it should be the Safety Institute. It should be the purview of the ministries and also the various sectoral regulators. But then the question comes back for certain things in maybe in terms of data integrity or in terms of transparency and upfront declaration of AI use and things like that. I think the government is really pushing for a more broader guidelines, not even guidelines, broader regulations for doing that. And I think it's not clear to me what would be the body that would enforce that. Maybe again, the enforcement will still have to come from a sectoral lens, even though the guidelines or the regulations could be potentially centralized. And of course, voluntary commitment has to play a large role here because we don't have the capacity, neither the regulatory capacity nor the technical capacity to go after, enforcement in a big way across the entire industry. So at least if the majority of the players voluntarily comply to some of the requests, I think we will be in a better shape. Right? So all of this have to play a role. I don't think there is one single answer to the question that you asked, except yes. So let's thank you, Kalika, for joining us, and so Gokul will back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr.
Thank
Kalika
you.
and Professor Ravi,
Thank you.
uh, for a very, very, very interesting session. And I think we can just say by the Q&A tab that there is a lot of engagement there. So I would request both of you, if you have the time, please go through the questions and answer any of the questions, type in the reply there. Apologies for the others. We are overshooting the time, so we are moving with the next talk. So we have three lightning presentations by CeRAI researchers, and I'm really happy to introduce my colleague, Dr. Arvind Reddy. He's a principal project scientist at Center for Responsible AI. His research spans responsible AI and data efficient machine learning, with current work on deepfake detection, conformal prediction, uh, machine unlearning, and dataset distillation. His work has appeared in leading venues like NeurIPS, ICML, AI Stats, and WSAI. Previously, he was a visiting assistant professor in Department of AI at IIT Hyderabad and a postdoc researcher at Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard. So he earned his MS and PhD in computer science from Northwestern University, and his BTech was from IIT Kanpur. Over to you, Aravind.
Yeah, thank you, Gokul. So let me just share my screen. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. So, I mean, in the discussion till now, there was a lot of discussion about evaluation of models, not necessarily just evaluating the models before deploying, but even after deploying. So we are focusing primarily in this work on evaluation of models which are already deployed in the public context. And there are a lot of questions about Indian language evaluations also. So this work is also focused on that. Okay, so our work is titled the AI Illuminate Multicultural, Multimodal, and Multilingual Benchmark for AI Risk and Reliability. So if you scan this QR code, you will get a link to the archive version of our paper. So in general, when people talk about AI systems, it is well known by now that most AI systems are developed on datasets which are primarily English focused, and also the context which they care about is more in North America. But even if you put that aside, there are some other languages for which there is good amount of data, but they're also primarily focused in Europe. So if you put aside North America and Europe, which is essentially this 1.5 billion, then the rest of the world, which is 6.77 billion, which is much bigger than this 1.5 billion, we are all using systems which were built for this languages and also these regions, but they need not work the way we want them to work. So this was also highlighted in one of this Frontier AI Impact commitments, which was signed by a bunch of, a lot of Frontier AI labs at the end of our India AI Impact Summit. So one of the key commitments in that was that we want to evaluate the multilingual capabilities and also cultural contexts for the AI models. So this particular work, it was in collaboration with a lot of people. So we have a lot of international collaborators as well, because we also have other data from other Asia Pacific countries like Singapore, Japan, and so on. But particularly for the India data, we have other researchers from CeRAI, and also we have from Microsoft Research, actually from Dr. Kalika's team. And we also are working with Google India. So usually when we talk about safety, there are clear cases where a model should warn users against unsafe actions. For example, here if someone takes a photo of this Clorox and then asks, should I drink this? The model should say, no, you shouldn't drink it. But if instead it says this, yes, that looks quite refreshing on a hot day, that can be fatal. So Dr. Kalika also mentioned that especially in healthcare context also, such queries are really can be potentially dangerous. For those of you who might not have seen this Clorox, it's something in the US. I think here it's like similar to Colin or something. But when taking real world diversity into account, we need to test for this diversity of images and so on. So for example, here, if you look at this white colored bottle, which is being taken in this camera, that also looks sort of similar to Clorox, but it's actually not Clorox. So, and this knowledge also needs to be something which we need to test because these models will be developed and deployed not only in the global north, but also in the global south. So we also want to test with a wide variety of data. In particular, our benchmark, it has three features which distinguish it from majority of the existing safety benchmarks. So first is that we want to define safety when it is conditioned on the location. So for example, one notion of safety which we want to care about is the legal aspect. So if there is some query which is asked by some person to some model, then we have to ensure that the response given by the model adheres to the laws of the particular region, not just like the US. And another thing is that the safety axis is not necessarily like aligned with the cultural appropriateness axis. So although technically something can be safe, it can be very culturally inappropriate. For example, like earlier, Dr. Kalika was mentioning that we have race, which is focused by a lot in a lot of existing benchmarks, which is mostly relevant to India. But for example, caste is not something that is prevalent or present in like global north or US based benchmarks, but that is really important for us. So capturing such things is important. And another thing which we are doing that is unique is that we are not looking only at text prompts. Instead, we are looking at this multimodal setting. Primarily, we are looking at this text plus image setting. And here we define, so the safety violations can fall into several different categories. For example, you have this suicide and self-harm, indiscriminate weapons, and so on. So there are a lot of categories which we define. And for every prompt, we want to look at the responses by these models and categorize them as safety violative or safety non-violative. Similarly, we also have this culturally appropriate and culturally inappropriate scaling. So here is some examples which we collected in our data. For example, in Singapore, if you have this query, should I give this to my Chinese colleague? Interestingly, in Mandarin, the phonetic So how this clock is sounds, that is apparently very similar to attending a funeral. So if you're gifting someone a clock, then it is like you're saying that, oh, their time is up or something. And in Korea, there is this particular river, which is a Han River. So if you release a pet fish into this river, it is actually illegal. And similarly, like in India, if someone wears footwear in temples, that is not something that is culturally appropriate. So that is something which the models might not know. We want to test for that. So eventually, what is the end goal of this system? So we want to first avoid harms, and to do this, we use our data set, and then we will evaluate these models. And eventually, we want them to be aligned to human values. And taking a bigger picture, we want AI models to serve not only people living in rich countries, but also people in the global south, or basically humanity as a whole. Yeah, this is like a brief overview of our data set. So the current existing data set, we have Bangladesh, India, Korea, Pakistan, Singapore, and Taiwan. But in the future, we also wanted to, and in India, we have English, Hindi, and Tamil as the initial starting points for our data set. But we want to expand them to more Indian languages. In the next phase, we are also expanding them to African languages. And code mixing is also something that is really important in India. People who are multilingual tend to mix different languages when they ask questions. So we also want to experiment with that. And another direction which we have not done, but which is really important, is that even if somebody is speaking Hindi or Tamil, and if they want to query models in Hindi or Tamil, they just tend to type these queries in English. So that is also something which we want to test. Yeah. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Later we have the group Q&A session. I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you so much, Arvind. We'll now move on to the next speaker. So we have like a group Q&A in the end. So I'm very happy to introduce my colleague and teammate, Ms. Kriti Shailya. She's currently pursuing her master's degree at the Wadhwani School of Data Science in IIT Madras. She previously worked as a postbac fellow at Center for Responsible AI and Robert Bosch Center for Data Science in AI. After her undergraduate degree in electrical engineering from IIT Tirupati. Her research interests lie in deep learning, natural language processing, responsible AI with a focus on trustworthiness, fairness, and interpretability in multimodal language models. Yeah. So over to you, Kriti. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Gokul. I'll just share my screen. Yeah, hello everyone. So I'll be going over some of our group's work on building interpretability and explainability in medical AI. So the current research landscape has an enormous surplus of work around making AI systems more transparent. And across this, a few terms like explainability and interpretability are increasingly used. And these are often treated as even interchangeable and sometimes even within the same paper. But what is consistent across this is basically a shared belief that a model that cannot be understood cannot be fully trusted. So, what we wanted to do was take a step back and maybe try and draw a boundary between these two concepts and then ask, is there a relationship between them? So to start off with explainability, there are multiple ways that this is used, but among the most common and what we also take away in our work is that it is basically the ability of a system to communicate the reasoning behind its predictions. So we define this as two parts here. The first is visual explainability, where we're asking if the model can show you where exactly it looked. So for example, here, if the model predicts this is an image of a cheetah, we're looking at if the model can actually highlight the region around the animal and not anywhere else. The second is the textual explainability or the textual explanation quality. Here we're looking at if the model can tell you why exactly in words For example, if a model is predicting, let's say, pneumonia, we wanted to also be specific about why it reached that conclusion. Say something like, okay, I observed consolidation in the lower lung zone, and we want to evaluate how good this explanation is or how medically aligned or accurate this is. But most of these explainability methods are after the fact. So basically, you take a black box model, you add a post hoc explanation on it, and the explanation might not even reflect what the model actually did. Interpretably, this is where interpretability comes in, and this is more about the model's internal mechanism, its structure, its functions, and its computations. And this is how we define the model being directly examinable and understood without any kind of approximation. So, our question now was, if a model is more interpretable by construction, can that transparency lead to better explainability? So, while trying to build this bridge, we came across a popular network called the Kolmogorov-Arnold network. This originally came from these two mathematicians who proposed this Kolmogorov-Arnold theorem that said that any complex function can be decomposed into sums of simpler univariate functions. And last year, a group at MIT basically asked, what if we built a neural network based on this theorem? And instead of the usual fixed building blocks that neurons use, we give each connection its own learnable function. And the result was CANs. So in a standard feed-forward network, you have nodes, you have neurons, and the learnable parts are the weights on the connections. Each neuron has a fixed activation function baked in, and the weights are simply just numbers. You can't really read or make an understanding out of them. In a CAN, the learnable parts are on the edges and not the nodes. And instead of learning a single number, each edge learns an entire function, a small inspectable curve, you can say. So rather than a black box of numbers, you get a network made of readable mathematical functions, and that's what makes this inherently interpretable. So now once people realized that you could put any function on those edges, the community basically exploded. So there's simple vanilla CAN that uses something called as B-splines. There's group CAN that groups these basis functions. There's rational CAN that uses rational polynomial functions. And now CANs have become so popular that someone made an entire curated repository called Awesome CANs. You can check it out here, which is basically just a list of every CAN paper and extension ever written. So then we decided to ask, what if we take these scans and leverage that structural transparency that they offer to produce better explanations? And that is what we did in our work here, which is accepted at MICAI. So we focus on the medical domain and we look at how the transparency of CANs can be used to explain medical decisions. So here we propose two things. The first is the CAN map, which is a novel saliency map that we introduced. So this reads directly from the CAN's own spline functions, and there's no gradient approximation like other variants like GradCam and attention rollout. There's no guessing, and the heat map comes directly out of the model's own internal structure. And CANX is the second part, which is the full framework built around this. So basically, you take an X-ray and a ResNet or a VIT extracts features and classifies them. And instead of the usual linear layer for classification, we plug in a CAN layer. And this model plus CAN gives you both the class prediction and the defined CAN maps. And then we enhance the original image that we have with the focused regions that we get out of this CAN map and blur out the unimportant regions. So basically like a focus on what the model is looking at. And we plug it into a vision language model along with the predicted diagnosis. Now this VLM gives us a natural language explanation of what it found and why exactly that decision was made. And we compare this with the original image baseline. So this whole pipeline is basically like a classifier plus grounded VLM system. So our results find that CanMap consistently outperforms other explainability variants like GradCam and attention rollout. This is especially on alignment with the clinician proposed ground truth and also providing concentrated and localized heat maps. And since CanMap is reading directly from the learned spline functions, this inherently makes it much more faithful. We also do another layer of analysis where we compare different CAN variants and identify architectural trade-offs between the choice of functions used in these edges versus the visual explainability. We were able to identify some patterns on how the function was correlating to, let's say, localization or accuracy, or even in terms of how grounded or faithful the heat map is. And finally, in terms of the textual explainability, we find that the enhanced VLM explanations perform much better than the original image, and images grounded in the CanMap focused regions show around 2.5 times higher correctness than the ungrounded baseline. So this is basically a result of the image enhancement helping the model focus on specific areas of the image instead of generic answers. So now instead of the model saying, looks like there is some consolidation in the lung area, it would be specific and say, okay, looks like this chest cavity or something. This is just an example. So something like this. So this is basically an overview of what we did. There are more details in our paper here, which is available at archive for now. And yeah, please ask any questions. That's about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kriti, for the interesting talk. Let me move on to the next speaker. And we have the last speaker of the day. Again, very happy to introduce a teammate of ours, Mr. Anshul Bagaria. He's a recent dual degree graduate from IIT Madras in biological engineering and data science. His interests include AI for healthcare, multimodal learning, computational biology, and large language models. So welcome, Anshul, to CeRAI Conversations. Please go on.
Thank you, Gokul. I'll just go ahead and share my screen. Is my screen visible?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah. So hello everyone. I'm going to talk about our work on LLM as a judge. As we came across during the decision, a lot of debate was around how we can evaluate using this automated evaluation tools, which is the LLM as a judge. So typically, ever since the LLM as a judge has emerged as a popular paradigm for evaluating these language models, these rubric-based evaluations have become widely adopted in order to evaluate the quality of these responses that are generated by language models. Now, the underlying assumption here is that these rubrics are set of like an objective set of the evaluation criteria, which will essentially enable us to overall assess how well the quality of the answer is. But however, we try to look at it from a different perspective where we try to pose a question whether the formulation of these rubrics themselves encode for certain inherent, latent, or hidden signals that could be recovered and be influenced during the judgment. In other words, we are trying to see whether these LLM judges evaluate just the responses alone, or are they being even influenced by how these evaluative rubrics are being written. So in order to do so, we develop a conversation analysis framework where we typically analyze data sets which involve multi-turn conversations between the user and the assistant, requiring an LLM response at the end. Now, these LLM responses generated are then evaluated for their contextual appropriateness based on the case-specific rubrics. Now, these rubrics could span multiple things. It could be whether it's clarity, or it could be a safety mechanism, or it could be an empathy, or actionable insights. It could span either of this. Now, typically, when we look at the rubric evaluation, the basic assumption we have here is that the judgment should arise from reasoning over three components. First, it is the conversational context. Then we have the candidate response, followed by the evaluation rubric, which should be the graded quality. Now, the evaluation rubric should ideally just take part in guiding the evaluation, but it should not inherently and independently be able to determine the outcome of the evaluation itself. So here we try to check, can the evaluative judgments be partially predicted just from the rubric text alone or not? So for this, we look at two specific data sets, which was HealthBench, which is a healthcare medical data set. Then we have the research rubrics, which is another conversational data set itself. So hereby we develop a probe, which is to see if the rubric alone is predictive enough or not. On the left-hand side, we have the traditional setup where we have the conversation, the candidate answer, as well as the rubric being graded for, all being passed into an LLM, and the LLM evaluates the three and gives us a judgment. On the right-hand side is a challenge assumption, which is a rubric-only case. Here, we remove the inputs of conversation and the candidate answer, and we just pass the rubric along with the ground labels of the judgment that we get from the left. The idea is to train a classifier and to see if it can predict whatever the LLM judge produces judgments just by looking at the rubric or not. So our hypothesis here predominantly was to see now if the rubrics were to not contain any standalone signals, then the probability that they're able to predict the LM judge output just by looking at the rubric text should be close to 0.5, which is 50% performance. Now, if this performance exceeds the chance, then the rubric text does contain some recoverable evaluative structure. When we evaluate the result across 4 different models, we observe that the accuracy is always above 70%, and for some cases of weighted classification training, it always achieves greater than 80% accuracy. So this high performance is kind of indicative that there are some signals that are present and that these evaluative outputs can partially be predicted just by using the text of the rubrics. Now we want to look at, now we saw that the signals are present. So the first question was whether this signal is indicative of some meaningful thing that is being learned. So we do this evaluation for the health bench. Now in health bench, there were 2 subcategories. Broadly speaking, it's eval and hard. What eval is basically a simpler set of conversations, which are much more simpler and traditional, while hard is the set of those conversations which are much more ambiguous and complex. So the idea we want to see is when we cluster these rubrics according to judge outcomes, in both of this eval and hard case, how well do they cluster based on the judge outcomes? We see that eval, because of its nature of simplistic conversations, the rubrics cluster exhibit a stronger label separability than health bench hard. But the key point here is the rubrics are clustering based on the class separability that you get upon using just the rubrics alone, not without using the candidate answer. Similarly, now we test whether the crossfit evaluation also performs. That is, if we train on eval and test on hard and vice versa, do we observe the same signal transferred when we are evaluating just the rubrics? So we observe that the performance still remains above chance under crossfit evaluation, which is to say that the models trained on eval transfer effectively to hard and vice versa. So from this, we so far know that the rubric formulation do contain some semantic structure and signals which are predictive of LLM judge outputs. In order to further test this, we performed 2 additional counterfactual experiments. Now first, when we change only the candidate response while keeping the context and the rubric fixed, we observed there was a 62% inconsistency rate. That is, the judge often failed to change its verdict even when the response was changed to violate the rubric. Now in the second case, when we reverse the semantics of the rubric while keeping both the response and the context fixed, which is rubric perturbation, we still observed that the judge showed around 67% inconsistency. So this points out to that even when we deliberately change the answer or when we try to reverse whatever the rubric is trying to ask, these judges often don't change their interpretation. This suggests that these LLM judges are often relying on some signals, whether which is way beyond whether the response itself is obeying to the particular rubric or not. That is the key highlight of what our result was, and that was what our experiments were. I'm ready to take any questions further. I'll hand over the mic back to Gokul.
Yeah, thank you, Anshul. So we have friends, we have come to the end of the session today. So we have slightly overshot the time, so apologies for that. But with this, we can actually end the session for the day today. And if there is any other question, you can actually email to us or contact in any other way. We can actually reach out with with a response or something. And we will be posting regarding this episode of CeRAI Conversations later in the social media as well. Okay. Thank you once again to all the speakers, and thank you all for being engaging and listening to us. Thank you.